Welcome to the 25th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, still recording from home, we'll be discussing how you can level up as a newcomer in tabletop gaming. This episode of the GameFor Podcast is brought to you by TurboDork, radical paints to make your gray world colorful. I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
And we are part of MilkCan. MilkCan is the company that makes the app GameFor. GameFor is for connecting tabletop gamers. It's available on iOS and Android and also on the web. And it is designed to help you find tabletop gamers in your local area. Currently, you probably can't really be playing with local gamers in your area, but we're kind of working on that. And we hope to be able to start playing with people again face-to-face real soon. We've designed the app to help the tabletop gaming community, and the podcast is about building community and building your enjoyment within tabletop gaming and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What have you been doing since the last episode, Matt?
Oh, let's see. First, I've been playing some family games. So not necessarily maybe games I would pick first or highly recommend. But actually, it's been very enjoyable nonetheless. So playing some Go Fish, which I had to be kind of dragged into family game night for that one. But actually had a lot of fun with that. The kids and wife and I had a lot of fun playing that. And then replayed my wife's favorite game, Roomy Cube, a few times, both with kids and then just by ourselves a couple times. So
I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that. That's just like a card game, right?
Roomy Cube is with like dice, or not dice, like dominoes looking ones, and there's like 4 colors, but they're also got numbers on them, and you're basically trying. It's kind of like Crazy Eights with dominoes. You're trying to collect like a series or a collection of like 4 12s, but they all have to be different colors or stuff like that.
Okay, all right.
And you can play it, one game off, or you can play it, there's a scoring mechanism that you can, play multiple games as well. So,
yeah. What other kind of stuff you've been playing?
So been doing some more online D&D. I was, we were talking just before this. I was talking about that Roll20 has started to become almost a necessity for some of this stuff. We had a large NPC battle encounter this last session. I want to say there was like 25, maybe even 30 NPCs with leveling up and everything we had to do. And wow, I don't even want to know how I would have done that on the table.
Like regular paper, pen and
paper. It took. I would say it took about a little over an hour and a half to run, and they were doing really well. I mean, there was 2 fireballs that took out a lot of people, so they played it even faster than probably it could have lasted. I want to say it would have been like a 4-hour affair on the table, trying to track players and area effects and saving throws and everything else that I was able to kind of do a lot faster that way. So kudos to Roll20, and I still wish the UX was a little bit more friendly. Even going week to week, I'm starting. I forget some of the shortcuts, but overall, it's been a good experience. So it's free, so we're still on the free version. I have been buying some packs and stuff like that to get more NPC characters and stuff like that from time to time.
Like tokens and stuff, almost.
Yeah, so like some monsters, especially if it's kind of a cool monster, or an odd monster, I will go ahead and do like the $5 monster packs and get anywhere from like 10 to like 30 different sprites that we can use. So I have been paying for it that way, so which is worked out really well. That's been going well, and then finally started, after 2 years of planning in my head, finally started building the new bar that's going to be going in my game room. So hoping to have that done by the time I start having people over again.
Yeah. For those that don't know, we live in Wisconsin, and a lot of people's home basements have a bar in them. That's not weird for this area of the country. Yeah, exactly.
I got a kegerator. I think that was a Christmas gift.
Hmm.
So I've been, and now this is just kind of expanding on that a little bit. Well, it's going to be an 8 foot long bar, but so it's
Sure.
a lot of it, I guess. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a like it, it was always just a normal thing to me to go over to someone's basement. Like we don't have one here in our basement, but a lot of people do. And then and then you talk to people from outside of Wisconsin, and they're like, "You have a bar in your basement? That's weird." And you're like, "Oh, it's kind of Wisconsin." Yeah. I mean, it's not like a legal bar. It's not like a you're not selling stuff down there, but it's for parties and hanging out and
right,
whatnot.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
When you can't go outside for 6 months of the year, it
Yeah,
helps.
exactly. With all the snow and ice. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
good thing that's warm out and go outside all the time with everybody.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. That's super good.
Yeah. So how about
Um,
you, Adam?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of my miniature painting and hobby and stuff like that. I just finished two small war bands and a kind of a special surprise miniature, which I actually talked about in the last episode, for an upcoming solo battle report that I'll be filming soon for my YouTube channel. So, normally battle reports you're playing against another person, and then you have battles and whatnot and all that stuff, and people watch it. Some people live stream it. I usually record it and then edit it afterwards, so it's quicker. Um, but and I'm trying to do one about once a month, kind of since about roughly the beginning of the year.
Right.
But it looks like the next one is probably going to have to be a solo battle report. So because just still with social distancing, so I'm going to be using a game. I think I talked about it a little bit in the last episode called Planet 28. The person who wrote Planet 28 has just recently also released now solo rules, so that's
Oh,
really nice. It's
nice.
kind of a good time to do it, and also released in the same pack. It's also like kind of like a longer campaign, more in-depth campaign rules as well for the game because it's a relatively simpler kind of miniatures rule set, but it's kind of elegant. It's nice that way. It's not too. As I get older, I'm less and less interested in the really super, for lack of a better term, crunchy rule sets. So
Hmm.
I kind of like some of the slightly simpler kind of stuff. Um, anyway, yeah, so that'll be coming soon. But I've just finished those up. Actually, last night I did I sprayed the matte varnish on them to
Oh,
kind of
okay.
protect the paint
You're
job.
really done. Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, one last model does need a little bit of a gloss because they need a little gloss coat on some like lenses. Like you spray the whole thing kind of be matte, but then you
Yeah.
want like maybe like a lens on some sort of scope or something like that or whatever
Oh,
to
so
be more
how do you do
glossy.
that?
I just use Games Workshop has something called, I think it's called Art Coat, which is a gloss varnish that I
Ah,
just put on with a brush,
okay.
just in certain spots. I've done that too before with like if you've got a model that's supposed to have like there are some kind of evil demon creatures that are called Nurgle in both Warhammer 40k and also Warhammer Age of Sigmar. They're kind of
Hmm.
an evil chaos god, and they're all about like decay and disease. Sometimes those models have got like an open wound and stuff like that. And so I frequently go through after I've done the matte varnish because I prefer the matte varnish. I go back and then paint on a little bit of gloss in like the open wound areas because basically it makes it look wet. So,
Sure.
yeah, that's kind of a little extra feature that I like to put in. But that's basically otherwise they're pretty much done. So that's cool.
Nice.
And then I've also been building and priming terrain for another game called Age of Sigmar Warcry, which is sort of a smaller skirmish game based out of the world of Age of Sigmar, which is Warhammer's kind of fantasy arm. And
Right.
it is, so the Warcry came out last summer, and it was a box set that you bought that had two small war bands in it. It had terrain and the board and the dice and all that stuff. And so I've been sitting on it for a while, and I'm starting to get a little bit more interested in it. I want to give it a try. So I built probably 60 to 70% of the terrain, maybe 60, and then primed it this last weekend outside with the rattle can because it was gorgeous. It was like 70 degrees, and not humid. But I still had some other pieces that need to be built. So I'm going to be finishing those last pieces up, and then I'll prime them up most likely. And then that'll help me to get that stuff ready for paint,
Okay.
and go from there. And then
Nice.
lastly, I'm slowly again trying to jumpstart the basement cleaning project. Again, it's stalled pretty badly. I'm not. I'm a terrible basement cleaner, but I do want to, like I said, I sort of mentioned this earlier before the show. I do want to. I just bought a new microphone that I want to use. It's not just a simple USB plug-in. It's kind of got some stuff going on, and so I really need to get my computer. Like right now, I'm in the dining room. When I do my live streaming on every other Sunday morning, I am doing it from the dining room, and I really need to move my computer stuff off of the dining room table after several years and move it down into the basement. And do that. So to do that, I need to do some cleaning so I can at least I don't have to clean the entire basement before I move down there, but I do need to at least clean a good portion of it, or at least enough. So that's kind of the thing. I don't know. It's like right now, because of the way things are, I've been really more interested in building and painting and not so much cleaning. I know I hear from people all over that are like, oh, I mean, my house has never been cleaner during all this lockdown. And I'm just like, that's not the thing I want to do when given tons and tons of extra time. I got lots of other things I could do. You know what I mean? I just like, people are like, oh, I'm doing all this yard work. And I'm like, well, if you like yard work, great. But if you don't, not really. I don't know. I don't know. I have lots of things that I like to do, so I'm never bored. You know what I mean? That's the thing, is that I think I'm astounded when people are like, oh, I'm just so bored. And I'm like, don't you have things that you like to do that aren't watching television or Netflix or whatever? Oh, speaking of which, we just finished a series last night. Yeah.
Okay.
From Netflix called October Faction.
Okay.
And if you like well written, well acted TV shows, you should not watch this, because it is not great. It's just really it's just.
That's not where I thought you were going with that. Yeah.
No, it's just like, I like the concept. I mean, it's kind of like there's like vampires and werewolves and this and that and secret, but it's just. Ugh.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, I started watching it and I was like, oh yeah, this sounds like it's up my alley. And like halfway through the first episode, like Colette's just like, yeah, I'm just not into this. And I'm like,
yeah, it
was the lady from Bones, right? Or not Bones.
Yeah, it was. Bones. She was not the main character from Bones. She was one of the like the boss doctor.
Yeah.
And so she was in it, and nobody else that I really recognized much, but she was kind of but I don't know. I mean, there was parts of it that I liked, but we were trying to watch it because, we sometimes try to watch stuff together here and there, but it was just not good. Like the first couple of episodes, I'm like, all right, this isn't so bad. And then, not so good. So, and evidently they've decided not to renew it. So there won't be a second season. So just, FYI.
We got that going for you.
Yeah, which is nice. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a question from the audience. If you've got some questions, folks, please put them in the comments below on YouTube if you're watching / listening to this on YouTube, or feel free to email us at podcast@iamgamefor.com. We'll mention that address again at the end of the show. So, but let us know if you got some questions about things.
Right.
We're always looking to be able to answer some questions.
Yeah. So this one's from Brian. Brian says, what advice would you give in regards to someone coming out of their shell and being able to talk to others about the hobby? So very good question, Brian. I think we talked about this a little bit before the show, very briefly, kind of over Slack, about, how this, might be even more critical right now, that you can't necessarily hang out with your tabletop friends and kind of get that release. Now you might be talking with your family members or whatever, and trying to still want to talk about your hobby. So
yeah, I mean, I think personally a big portion of it, honestly, is to know your hobby, or know your audience.
Oh, I was going to say, your audience. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because there's a joke that goes around amongst tabletop gamers who there used to be years ago, there was a company at Gen Con that used to sell a shirt that said, don't tell me about your character. And it was because there are people who will start to tell you about their character because they really enjoy playing their D&D character or their
Mm-hmm.
Pathfinder character or whatever, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But a lot of that is very possibly not interesting to you as the person working at the grocery store or the person who's changing their oil or whatever. And you kind of have to know your
yeah.
audience.
Even as a D&D player, I sometimes really don't care about your player. Like, unless, if we're not playing together, I kind of, I'll listen to a little brief thing. But
Yeah.
when you start telling me about their 5th grade aunt and how that great aunt went on a side quest one time and, turned in 5 eggs for a chicken, I don't
Yeah.
care. I really don't care. I mean,
when you notice that the person you're talking to, their eyes are glazing over and they're like scanning for exits, you have to kind of like understand that and go, all right, I think I've maybe told enough about this story. I mean, it's just a situation. But that's not necessarily a great answer,
no,
I mean, it's
no, yeah. Well, and there's a great Red Dwarf episode. So one of the main characters on the show,
Mhm.
is kind of known for being annoying, and but he's a big risk guy. And one of the episodes, he's
Like
like,
Risk,
just
the board
the game, yeah. He's
Oh,
just
sure, okay.
going on and on about how this one game was just this epic game, and he's like, and then I rolled 4 2s, and he rolled 3 6s, and that and they're like,
Mhm.
okay, whatever. And he's like, oh no, here, okay, I haven't gotten to the really interesting part. They're like, oh, what's the really interesting part? He goes, then I rolled 2 3s. And like, like the really
Right, yeah.
interesting part is the same exact thing as the last hour you've been going on. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but for your audience, try to relate it to them. Like if they're into, like if their hobby is, I don't know, maybe they're into painting. So you could talk about, how, if you paint miniatures, you could talk about that. Like find ways to kind of
Sure.
relate what you're doing and what you like about the hobby with, stuff that they're possibly interested in.
It's more about looking for a nibble, really. It's
Right.
more about like, if you, let's say you're at work, this is kind of a standard thing. If you're, if
Hmm.
let's say you're not working from home in the future at some point and you're sitting there and a person asked you what you did this weekend or whatever, and you mentioned that you were playing some role playing games, or something like that. You played a role playing game on Saturday afternoon, and they're like, well, what do you mean? You could say something like, the first thing I think to do is to try to relate it to something that they probably understand. If you say, oh, well, we were playing like Pathfinder and this and that, and, that probably not going to understand that. But if you say, well, it's like Dungeons and Dragons, even if you weren't playing Dungeons and Dragons, you say
Right.
like, oh, it's like Dungeons and Dragons. And then they know the name, I'm sure, but they may
Right.
not necessarily know what that means. And you say, well, we were playing with some friends and stuff. And if they go, oh, and like change the subject, that's now the time to end. They're not necessarily your target audience, and that's fine. But if they start to ask a few more questions, you can certainly then kind of move forward and keep kind of, because maybe this is something that's very interesting to them. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's something that they're surprised by or confused by
Or
or
curious. Yeah.
curious, but it may not necessarily come to any kind of fruition. I worked at a place one time, and person asked me something about, I think I was taking a couple of vacation days to go to a convention, and he's like, well, what kind of convention? And I told him gaming, and he was like, oh, you mean like video gaming? I'm like, no. And then I explained to him, just very broad terms like what miniature gaming is, and he was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. So I showed him a quick picture or two, I think either on my phone or on Google or something like that. And I'm like, and you use dice, and it's this and that and these little people and stuff like that. And he was like, and then his first question was like, did you invent this? I'm like, no, I mean, this has been going on for quite some time. I'm not the only, this is a thing. And he was just like, he was surprised because he'd never heard of anything like it before, I guess.
Huh.
And, but he was not like, oh, I want to get into this. He was just
Right.
like, huh. And then I could tell at which point he was like, all right, I'm done. I don't need to know any more about
Right.
this. And that's, I think, really the important thing.
Mhm.
Now, let's say,
But
it
that could have gone
germinated.
a different way. Yeah. Because
Yeah. I
so
mean, he could have come back 3 weeks later and been like, so how do you paint those little guys? And then you start to understand that maybe you're
right.
going in the right direction. But
Look, one of my good friends I game with, when I first started working with him, I had been out of the hobby for 15 years, 10 years, something like
mhm.
that. and he mentioned something about, oh, he can't. I think we were going to do something, or there was a group outing. He's like, oh, I can't do that. That's my board game night. And at that time, I was still in the, well, I played Risk, Risk and Axis and Allies and stuff like that. But mostly when
Yeah.
I heard just the term board game, I assumed Monopoly, Sorry, that kind of thing. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so like this was like your friends, you play Monopoly. He's like, no, we play more Euro stuff. I'm like, I have no idea what that means, but tell me about it. So he started telling me, and then I'm like, huh, okay, that does sound kind of interesting. And that's when he showed me that Will Wheaton's Tabletop, I think, had just started airing.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and so he's like, oh, it's like that. I'm like, I did not know about this. I started watching that, and a couple months later, I ended up going hanging out that board game group. And then after getting back, getting into board games, that's what kind of got me back into the rest of the tabletop, hobby. But you never know. So don't think that nobody's going to be interested. Just kind of don't over communicate if they're not kind of giving you the feedback.
Yeah, and the real, I mean, this is more of a life hack than anything, because Brian is asking, if someone wants to come out of their shell, being able to talk to other people about the hobby, understand that people don't think about other people nearly as much as you might think they do. Like I people, you're at the store, let's say, and the person's like, they're like, okay, well, enjoy your groceries or whatever. And then you're like, okay, you too. And then you're like, well, they're not buying groceries. They're checking out groceries, or whatever, and then you feel like a doofus because you misspoke. And if you focus on that and think about it and, get anxiety from it and whatever, I mean, that happens to people, but it's partially because people don't understand that, like, that cashier literally did not think about it again after like 5 seconds later, 10 seconds
if they
later.
thought about it at all. It was
right, exactly.
the 10th person to do it that day.
Exactly. People focus on themselves a lot and how it affects them, but when other people's lives, it's not that people don't care. When and you can discuss that back and forth amongst yourselves. But in general, when you think that, well, what are they going to think of me? The answer is they're probably barely going to. So if someone at work asks you what you did this weekend, and you're afraid they're going to think you're a nerd or you're a weirdo because you like to play board games, or paint miniatures or whatever. I mean, just let them know what you do. And if that, I mean, they probably really won't focus on it. And honestly, if you look at like Dungeons and Dragons, what's his name? The guy, Joe Manganiello?
I
can't think of his
I butcher his name every time I try. Yep.
Right. I mean, he was like an actor in Magic Mike. He was like all, dancing around, stuff like that. He's huge into D&D. Stephen Colbert is big into D&D.
Right.
It just came out recently that the guy who plays Superman, Henry Cavill, has just started painting Warhammer 40K miniatures because he's on lockdown, and he's always been a video gamer. And now that he's got the time, he's decided to start painting miniatures. So, I mean, it's a pretty good time, honestly, here in 2020, not for everything, but it's a pretty good time these days to be what used to be considered a nerd. So if, and I was saying before about being hobbies. Bored, you know what I mean? Exactly. Yeah. If you don't have a hobby, then what are you going to do? So, yeah.
Because there's people that make their own, flies for fishing, and
sure.
Ones that are, into archery, and, there's ceramics, there's 1,000 different hobbies that people might be self-conscious about that you wouldn't give it, any second thought to. But so be okay that own it, that you like the hobby, and communicate it.
People think like, oh well, games are for kids. Well, what about sports? I mean, really, the whole concept of like grown men and women running around chasing a ball. And like that's something that's super important. But
grown men and women that are paying money to dress up and then go and look at those people playing that same kid game, like
right, yeah.
Like the
people, talk about cosplayers, but like,
yeah,
you see those people in the stands at the football game, and they're dressed like a bear or a frozen tundra or whatever.
I have yet to see the convention like three guys run by me with their chest painted with the word orc spelled out across it.
Right. Well, it'd be, the big question would be whether it would be with a C or with a K, really, I suppose.
That's probably why there's like
Yeah.
them.
That's why it hasn't happened.
They're still fighting about it now.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the concept of, as far as like, what about if someone wants to come out of their shell? It's not easy for everyone. But I think it's easier when people start to realize that, not everyone is going to judge you. And also everyone's got their own kind of, well, many people have their own kind of weird hobbies. Some people don't. And those are the people that are kind of frankly tearing their hair out right now because they can't, that they're bored and they can't do what they normally do, which is not a hobby, I guess. And I mean, it's important, I think, to do that.
I just saw at one of Adam Savage's videos. He was talking about cabin fever and sculpting with like a coat hanger. I'm like, yeah, there's probably somebody out there that they do that all the time and are really, really good at it. Like,
oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, there's new hobbies being invented or, done all the time. So,
I mean, admittedly, like the sculpting that gets done for miniatures games in general, nowadays it's a lot of, computer. It's done by computers and stuff, 3D. But back in the day, you would sculpt with this epoxy putty, and then it was like two parts. It was blue and then yellow, and you squished it together to make it green, and then eventually it would harden and all that kind of stuff. But you would sculpt it over a bent up, like a paperclip. So you'd make something called an armature, which would basically be like the skeleton, and then so you would pose it and all that kind of stuff, and then you would sculpt the other stuff around it. So if you're using like a coat hanger as the basis to the sculpture, that's what holds it up, makes it rigid, makes it easier to sculpt and stuff like that. I mean, so yeah, there's people out there who are doing all kinds of creative things. There are people out there who are doing social things. In many situations, tabletop gaming is both creative and social. Whether it's creative, you're working with your hands, or whether it's creative making up stories, or whether it's creative making up new games or modifying house rules and stuff like that. So I don't think it's anything to be. I mean, I can say this as a person who's been a lifelong gamer, but and I don't seem to have any kind of fear of public speaking. But generally, if you look at it from the aspect is that everybody's got some sort of hobby that they enjoy. Gaming is getting more and more mainstream, tabletop gaming. And also, generally, people don't really think that much about other people too much, after the first initial reaction. It's not something to worry about, is hopefully, at least. And I would definitely try to give it a try to talk to some folks. Again, if they're not interested, if it doesn't come up, if you're just sitting there in a meeting talking about something, and if you just start going on about, Settlers of Catan, that's maybe not necessarily the right place or time. But if people ask you like what you did this weekend or that kind of thing, or hey, that kind of stuff, let them know. And if you kind of set the hook and they seem a little bit interested, give them a little bit more. Don't go crazy.
Right.
And
that's how you get newcomers into it. I know that at the
exactly
at the computer convention that I go to, the coding convention last August, we got one guy to play D&D with us because we happened to be talking about it near him. And he's like, "Oh, I've always wanted to try that." And we're like, "Come sit down," and
yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes people are in, just as much in the show as you are, and they're looking for someone to kind of give them the excuse to talk about it. So,
yeah, exactly. I mean, it can be a situation where they just don't know anybody else. They've always been kind of interested, but they don't know anybody else. And now, if you let them know that you're part of that world, then maybe they can, at the very least, start asking you questions, and then maybe they're going to get interested. And so, it's not a thing I would hide particularly. It's not a thing I would necessarily, just like if you were super into football and if you just immediately brought up football in every situation, no matter what it was, people would be like, ugh, the football guy. And so, that's just a thing that just knowing your audience a little bit and understanding that that's maybe not the right place or time. And that's just kind of the part of it, but yeah.
And everybody knows that fantasy football is D&D for jocks. Everyone knows that.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. Well, we want to thank Brian for sending in that commercial, or
Brian.
Sending in that question, and we will reach out to Brian and try to send Brian a official limited edition GameFor Podcast T-shirt, so that they can wear it with pride, potentially, and maybe people ask them about their T-shirt, and then they can talk about the podcast, and then there you go. So yeah, we'll be reaching out to Brian, and thanks again for sending in that question. Have you been looking for a way to make your miniatures stand out in the tabletop? TurboDork is a radical line of metallic and TurboShift paints that will make your gray world colorful. TurboShift paints change colors as you move your models around and are great for spell effects, visors, weapons, and much more. Or let's say you wanted to make your minis truly metal but colorful. Check out their metallic paints with colors like People Eater Purple, Spicy Meatball Red, and All That Glitters Gold. I'm working myself on there's some models I'm going to be adding to my Warcry game that I'm doing that terrain for that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And they're called the Corvus Cabal. And the Corvus Cabal is they have like crow feathers and stuff like that. And I've been trying to find I want to use potentially one of the TurboDork paints to get that sort of look. You know, like when you look at a blackbird and you catch him just in the sun and you can kind of see that kind of greenish purplish kind of glitter. Yeah, I want to do that. So I'm trying to find the right one. Right now there's a color called Dark Net that they make that I'm thinking might be close, but I want to mess with that and go from there.
Yeah, that'd be a cool effect.
Yeah, I think just on the feathers. Yeah, definitely. If you need to add some color to your tabletop life, TurboDork has you covered. Check with your local retailer or hit the TurboDork website at www.turbodork.com. And thank you to TurboDork for sponsoring the GameFor Podcast.
Thanks.
Absolutely. All right. So let's see here. So basically we were talking about today's subject is about how to kind of level up as a newcomer. We've talked about getting started, and now you want to get past getting started and get into like the next phase, maybe.
Right. You want to be the established gamer.
To some degree, you've gotten your feet wet. Maybe you've even, found some of your favorite games, and you've maybe found your genre and things like that. And then the question becomes like, well, what's kind of the next step? What's the next thing to kind of try to move towards, hang your hat on? We did we did a podcast a while back. It was, it's both. We did a podcast a while back about like how to kind of stretch your legs, how to grow as a gamer. If you're into this, well, maybe you might be into another, maybe you're interested in RPGs, and how do you get into that, even though you're already a board gamer? Or maybe you're into this, and how do you get into that? And, kind of talked a little bit about like gateway games and stuff like that.
Yep.
This is more, I still want to be a board gamer, but I want to be I don't want to say necessarily a better board gamer, maybe a more well-rounded board gamer. You could do this also for RPGs or all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah, like where do you go after you've gotten through the gateway games, you've started finding some of your games, and now you're like, okay, I like this. This is my hobby. Where do I go now?
Yeah,
keep expanding into that.
And that's one of the things that's great about gaming in general, and not just even tabletop gaming, but you also see this in video games as well. There's definitely places, like it's not just like play as usual. You don't just buy a game, whether again it's a video game or a tabletop game, and then just go, okay, well, I got to just follow the rules, and I just have to pay attention to just what it does, and that's all it is. There's a lot of other things you can do, which has been something that you and I have talked about in the past, and that's been super helpful. So, like one thing you can do as you play a game, especially if you find that you seem to be, and this is not even necessarily that you have to be winning more frequently amongst your friends. You might not be winning, but you just want to get better. You might want to look into the competitive scene. And there's competitive scenes in many different types of tabletop gaming, not just the one that kind of everybody knows, which is generally like Magic the Gathering, that kind of thing. If you've ever been into a game store on a Friday night, you've probably seen Friday Night Magic. There'll be a lot of Magic players in the store, and they are generally playing almost like a small little mini tournament if you're not a player. Like, I'm not a player these days. I haven't played Magic in years and years and years. But it is still it's a competitive style game, and usually most Magic the Gathering or Friday Night Magic things are like, we're going to play and maybe I win some free packs, so there's a definite competition. It's not just like let's play to have fun. There's an actual like
Right.
mini tournament sort of feel to it pretty much every week. And a lot of
Yeah.
shops have got multiple different, like maybe not on Friday night, but maybe on Tuesday night they play Commander, or all kinds of different types of other types of collectible card games
Right.
in a
You can
tournament sort of format.
do an escalation league or something, so you don't have to go right to a giant tournament. Like if you're getting the miniatures, you can go from that gateway and then start building up your army, but still get to kind of play as you go and kind of learn
Yeah.
and adjust as you're going.
An Escalation League for miniatures is, and I just did a video about this on my YouTube channel. It's basically like most miniature games use a point system, meaning that you and I are going to get together and we're going to play such and such game, and we're both going to have a 500 point army, or we're going to have 1,000 point army. And every game uses different point costs and stuff like that. So it's not like 1,000 points of Warhammer 40K is the same as 1,000 points of Malifaux from Weird Games. It doesn't scale that way.
Right.
But two armies that are the same amount of points from the same game should, in theory, be roughly the same, in power. They should be equally matched. So what you do see some stores do, and it's a smart thing, is they do these things called escalation leagues, where instead of saying, hey, build yourself a 2,000 point army and then come back to the shop and play. Instead, it's more of a situation of like, start with a 500 point army, and then everybody gets together and plays their 500 point armies against each other. And then like a month or so later, then they've got like a 750. And then next they come back and then it's like 1,000, and that kind of stuff. And the idea is that you're slowly growing your size. So there's
Right.
those types of things, which are not usually even necessarily tournaments. They're more along the lines of leagues. You know what I mean?
Right. So you get to kind of play, adjust. You also get kind of like mini scheduling, so that you
Yeah.
have deadlines, more that you can kind of hit versus going, oh, in 6 months I want to play this next convention, but I need to go from no army to a giant army. So
Right. And it's not just collectible card games and wargaming that have tournaments. I mean, there are board game tournaments out there. They're playing,
yes.
like Settlers of Catan is huge. Ticket to Ride, I know tournaments for that. I know in our local area, there are a lot of players of Mayfair games, and I don't know if Mayfair is technically in business anymore. I think they got bought by somebody else, maybe Asmodee. But for years they've made a series of games which are frequently known as crayon rails. Games like Empire Builder, games like Euro Rails, and it's basically like, each person's is like a train company, and you have to get goods from point A to point B, and you have to use this crayon, and you draw on the board, and the board is like laminated or whatever. And so you are building your route as you're like taking, stuff on your train. You're taking oranges from Florida, taking them up to Detroit where they don't have oranges and that stuff, that kind of jazz. And there was at that convention that we've gone to in the past, the Fire and Ice in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, like there was it was amazing because I didn't really know much about it, but I would talk to like one of the guys who ran the convention, and he's like, I see a bunch of these people sitting around this table, and there's, I don't know, 5 of them maybe. And he basically is like, that entire table up there, he's like, every one of them has been a world champion in the tournament at Gen Con at some point, and they all kind of live in like the middle of Wisconsin.
Nice.
So they've just kind of gone back and forth and traded. This year, Sam is the champion, and next year, someone else is the champion or whatever.
Right.
And so yeah, so it was really super interesting. So yeah, you may not know about it, but there are tournaments out there for all kinds of different games. For in board gaming as well, just and then there's there's competition, there's tournaments for role playing, isn't there?
I think there has been. I've never really understood how that works exactly.
Yeah, same here. I mean, you're much more familiar with Adventurers League, which is kind of a different thing.
Yeah, that's not so much, but yeah, I would.
But it's almost like a
have someone
league
tell me
instead
more
of a
about it.
tournament.
Right, that
right?
one's more of a league, yeah. So you can
Yeah.
go join that, and then the nice thing with that is that it's universal across all game shops. So especially like if you travel a lot or you don't really have a home game store, it's nice because there's basically rules on how the GMs run it, so you don't get a level one character with over loot and stuff like that. Like on a if you're playing like a normal game with your friends and you guys are meeting regularly, if the GM unbalances the game by doing something, that kind of keeps everyone they're still pretty much on equal footing and they can adjust the challenge and everything else. um that's a lot harder if like somebody went and got like an invisibility cloak at level one and you know uh plus 30 armor or some weird thing, and then they show up to play and they're just this uber character and then nobody else really gets to play. It kind of keeps all that in check
Right.
across.
Yeah,
So
I can see that. So I mean, moving into something, if you're into RPGs, moving into something like Adventurers League, if you're into specifically Dungeons and Dragons, is really kind of a good idea if you're looking to kind of spread your wings a bit as far as that's concerned, and level up, because you can be playing games a little bit more regularly.
hmm
There's kind of I mean, is there a ranking thing in Adventurers League, or how does that?
not really, no. You
Yeah.
just kind of level up and then there's adventures for different levels.
But if you go to
So
a convention, you could bring your character along,
yeah, that's
and
the whole
then
point, and then you
yeah, so
join.
it's like a
Yeah,
persistent sort of a thing.
yep. Um,
That's
so it kind of makes it so it's almost like everybody's in the same world type thing. So
yeah, yeah, that's very cool. Another possibility is, things if you want to kind of like take yourself to the next level is to kind of host games if you've been going to somebody else's place, and you become the host in that situation. That can kind of help.
yeah,
Also,
like
teaching games to other
right.
people, that's a big deal, because you were taught, and now if you're teaching somebody else, not only are you just helping to make more newcomers, but you're also, when you teach a thing, you learn more
I
about
was
it
to
than
say, yeah,
just
nothing,
yeah.
nothing will have you figure out a game better than having to teach to others. You learn so many more rules that you probably didn't think about uh, per your play style, or maybe the group you normally play with. Teaching others how
Mhm.
to play a game is definitely at the next level for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And they also, I mean, because what happens is that the player that you're teaching will very possibly ask questions that you've not thought of before, and then you're like, oh,
Right.
that is interesting. Like, what does happen if that happens? I'll have to go
hmm
look it up. And so, yeah, it does help you also to kind of learn different strategies, different ideas, even sometimes just the proper, or maybe even usual, like if you've been doing, like, and this happens a bunch of miniature games, sometimes you and your friends have been playing for quite some time and you've just all read the rule wrong, and so you've been doing it slightly
Yeah,
wrong,
that
and then
happens a
somebody else
lot.
comes along and is just like, well, it says here this, and you're like, oh yeah, that's an and, not an or, and then all of a
Right.
sudden it just very much changes how the rules are done, and that can
Yeah.
help a ton. So
I
yeah.
think any tabletop gamer has run into that. I know that like Tom Vassell and on Dice Tower was famous
Hmm.
for, apparently he played this game for, I want to say it was like 20 years or something like that, and then found out that he had been playing it wrong basically this entire time because of a
Yeah.
rule he didn't understand. So
And that's one of the differences between, like tabletop games and video games. The video game generally doesn't allow you to play something wrong because it's taking care of the rules. The upside, though, is then you also get to sort of, you can kind of house rule. Like maybe the game works a certain way and you just sort of don't like it,
right.
so you decide to sort of tweak things.
Yeah,
We're gonna.
we've had that where it's like everybody just kind of goes, "Yeah, this is not really a good part of the game, and let's just ignore this." And everyone's like, "Yeah, let's ignore that rule."
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I mean, sometimes you ignore a rule, sometimes you change how it works.
hmm
It kind of, it gets into, uh, it kind of gets into designing to some degree. A lot of
Yeah,
people, as they're playing, they really start to, get interested in becoming a game designer. You play some games and you're like, I
right.
really like this game except for this one part, or I like this game but I wish it was like this, or I have this idea in my head, and now that I've played a certain number of games, certain different types of different styles, now I can kind of take a look at it and go, I think it'd be better if this was the case, or it'd make me happier if like this was like this. And I think that there's some big benefit to it's not for everybody, but if you're interested in moving, like a lot of the people I know who have been board gamers for a long time, almost automatically eventually start trying to design their own games. Not all of them, but a lot of people who've been playing for a long time, at the very least, they start to house rule stuff where that's,
Right.
where you're tweaking something that's part of the game and you and your friends play it this way to make it more interesting to you, something like that. Or we think this rule is not the right way, and so we do it slightly differently or something like that. But the concept of house rules is kind of generally where you start with those things. But
Yeah,
it
that's
can
like
go
the gateway to designing. But yeah,
to designing. Oh yeah, it can go crazy. People, a lot of times what'll happen is that, and it's kind of like any kind of other hobby. Like if you decide you get interested in painting, you don't start off with a giant 60-foot mural. You know what I mean? Like you
Right.
start out by doing some sketching, or you start out painting little tiny paintings, or doing something like that to kind of get the hang of the materials and the ideas and the process. And it's the same with game design. Like you start off maybe and you make a relatively simple card game, or you make a relatively simple board game or something like that. That's
Or take the rules and put a new theme on it. We're taking these rules, but now we're doing this.
Combining a bunch of different games together. Like I like this part and this part and this part from these 3 different games. I'm going to squish it all together. You could do that as well.
We'll definitely have to talk about this in depth in another, because there's so many good tools out there right now for doing that. And
oh yeah, I mean seriously, because I have done some game design a long time ago. A friend of mine and I had a small little, what we called a hobby press. It was not like we had day jobs and stuff, and this was just a little thing we did on the side. But we did actually print. We got the stuff printed. We even got into distribution back in the mid '90s for a little bit. But like nowadays, if you want to make a game and produce it and have people worldwide be able to buy it, like literally you could do that in the same day because of PDFs and companies like Drive-Thru RPG and things like that. Like there was, when I first started there, you had to make an actual product and then sell it to people like at conventions or ship it to them or something. I mean, like It was all bits. There was no PDFs. And nowadays, if depending on the game, obviously it doesn't work for everything, but a lot of games, like I buy PDFs a lot also just because then I can have a bunch of different games and the rules for them there on my iPad.
And as 3D printing becomes more commonplace, that's
absolutely
that's going to become more and more a thing.
You're going to see people that are selling basically like a PDF of the rules and a package of STL files as the place, the pieces or the whatever, the tokens, that kind of jazz.
Yep.
You're right. We will probably talk about this in a future episode, but also there's something known as Protospiel, which is it's basically a prototyping kind of like get together play mini convention. And it's not something that's just like one place, like a Gen Con. It's like there are Protospiels all over. I know that they're here in Wisconsin. There's a couple different ones that happen. Like there's one in Milwaukee. There's, I think, one in Madison.
There'll be Protospiel nights at some friendly game stores. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But there's even bigger, like 2-day events and it's people who are designers who bring their things together, and then they and other designers sit around and play. And then basically you play, and then afterwards it's kind of like a question and answer. Like, all right, well, what'd you think about this? Well, I think that this part was a little clunky, or this part was really cool and I like that. You should look at this. And it's just great feedback and stuff like that.
And you don't have to be a designer. You can go just to play and help give feedback and be a play tester.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah,
and then you can kind of learn what they're doing, what the process they've gone to, and see how they're doing it. So,
and then kind of related, but you're not talking about so much about rule sets, but you're maybe talking about more of the physical stuff. Getting into custom pieces. Like there are people out there who love to make custom tokens. Like maybe the tokens that came with this game are like, they're okay. They're like little cardboard or something, but they want to make something that's maybe they get a laser cutter and they want to do laser cut like acrylic, or maybe they want to do 3D printed stuff, or maybe you want to make a little 3D printed divider that perfectly fits inside the box to hold all the tokens that are in there, because otherwise they're either in plastic bags or they're just sloshing around inside the box. There's a lot of people who love to customize their particular game, whether it is a board game. It's there's not a lot of customization necessarily. Yeah, I mean, you can buy like the play mat you like. You can buy the sleeves you like for something like
life counters and stuff can get pretty creative nowadays.
That's true too. Yeah, exactly. For collectible card games, people can get real fancy about that kind of stuff. The things they carry their stuff in.
I always like the rings and stuff that people have now. Like, or like I don't even have to.
Oh, that they wear on their fingers. You mean?
Yeah, it was like
the
dials. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can keep track of because in the standard in Magic, I think, is you start off with 20 health or 30 health.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
20. It's 20 because there's always a D20 to start, but and then
that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. So like that kind of stuff, like customizing and tweaking those things, I think is a really cool idea. But then if you're getting into more of the wargaming kind of hobby and you're interested in that, obviously there's plenty of craft to be had there, but if you're interested in wargaming, unless you got into something that's all pre-painted like Hero Clicks or something like that, or even X-Wing, Star Wars X-Wing, you are most likely going to be building and painting miniatures. But just because you're building and painting miniatures doesn't mean that you're not kind of customizing and modifying. It's known as kit bashing. And I did a video a while back about that as well on my YouTube channel about like taking like the head from this model and then the arms from this model and the body and the legs from this model and putting them together to make them look like something different that no one's ever seen before. So there's a lot of people who like to get into that. You can also start to sculpt your own stuff. Like this guy should have a fur coat, not like a cloak, like a fur cloak. And there are people out there who are talented enough or have taught themselves at least to be able to sculpt a fur cloak out of epoxy putty and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do to really like enhance the way that you do your models.
Yeah, there's some great YouTube videos out there about like adding like LED lighting to stuff. With how small you can get stuff. Like I've got some of my prints are. I just picked up. It just arrived this last week. 100 little light bulbs that look like lantern light. So that I can embed under stuff like, so my forges look like they're lighting up and fireplaces and stuff like that.
For like the little dungeon tiles and stuff like that.
I just watched a cool video the other day that they were adding smoke to their miniature.
Nice.
It was a bigger miniature, but they were doing it with E6 with basically it was like they said it was like actually like a pump normally for like breast pumps and stuff like that. So that it actually could like suck on the E-Sig. And then, but it was basically, but it was all battery powered. So they just, a couple of aquarium tubes later, and they had, smoke coming out of the smokestacks of their stuff.
Oh yeah, no, I mean all that kind of stuff is really interesting. I had, there was a guy at our local shop who had this warband of I think 7 skeletons for
Shadespire.
For Warhammer Underworld Shadespire. And he had drilled in through the back of their heads and put fiber optic cable in so it would stick out of their eyes, basically. And then he ran it down, and he was very creative with the way he did it. And then he put tiny little batteries in the base, and then he had these skeletons with like glowing eyes because they had actual,
awesome.
It was amazing. Yeah. So like there's a lot of like, if you really want to get into it, like I would say that one of the more sky's the limit sort of the 4 different genres. If you really want to step stuff up to the next level, is I think that wargaming is the way to go if you really want to start getting crazy with stuff. But you can obviously do a lot of kind of leveling up in any of the 4 genres, kind of like we've been mentioning. Another big thing too is indie games.
Yeah, kind of getting out of that like. I wouldn't say cookie cutter, but kind of the
more mainstream well-known games. Yeah, like everybody kind of knows about. Like I mentioned before, everyone's heard of D&D, even people who don't play.
Right.
But if that same time someone asked you, "Oh, hey, what did you do this weekend?" and you're like, "Oh, me and a group of people, we played Lancer." We played Lancer on Saturday night. They'd be like, I don't know what that is, and that's it's a more of an indie kind of RPG. And there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of indie games out there. Not just there's indie games in video games too. It's just, usually a bit of a bigger crew still, and you have to get involved with at least maybe some sort of publishing company. Like if you want to have an indie game on the Switch, the Nintendo Switch, that's not something you can just do by yourself. You need
Yeah.
to talk
Apparently,
to the folks at Nintendo and stuff, I mean.
yeah. Apparently, I just found out this weekend there are like indie game devs that are still making Atari 2600 games.
Well, that's crazy.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's like
Yeah.
six to 10 new games a month or something is being released. And they've got a way to do their own cartridges and everything. Like,
Well, that's crazy. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, but in tabletop games, you've got indie board games by small companies. You've got indie RPGs is a huge
yep.
one. I don't know that there's
Card
a lot of
games.
indie. There's not a lot
There's
of
card
indie
games.
collectible card games. I don't think.
Yeah, well, probably not collectible, but they might at
This is
least be
yeah,
trying out some of the rules and stuff by with more of a like a fixed set.
yeah, like
But
a living card game is what they generally
right,
call that these days. But yeah, there's definitely those, and obviously there's also indie. War games as well, and they're obviously they are a little harder to find. That's part of being indie. There are we're going to probably eventually do also a podcast just about indie games, and kind of talk a little bit about those. But you can definitely, if you do a search on Google, you'll find people like indie role playing game, indie board game, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
There's a
you
lot
can
of
spend
different
weeks
companies out there that
just reading the rules. You can spend a week easily.
yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Like, do you ever like what about like for role playing games? Have you done any besides like Lancer? I know you've been playing on and
yeah,
off, and that one's. What about
honey,
other stuff
what's
like
that
that?
like that honey bear one where you're basically playing as bears.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's some. I mean, there's some real unique ones that are just like off the wall, and
A
it
lot
can
of
really
them are
kind of
one offs,
expand
aren't
it.
they?
Yeah,
I
generally,
mean,
or they're just kind of like very specific rules where it doesn't lend itself to like now you're in this completely different thing. They're kind of a little bit
and a
more
one off
versatile.
game does not mean you can only play it once. It's just a one off RPG means that you generally play it one night, and then if you play it again, it's a different
Yeah, you're
everything,
not usually
different character.
leveling up and improving characters and persistence. Yeah.
It's almost like a non-live action version of like the what are those like mystery dinner kind of things,
Oh yeah, yeah.
murder mystery dinners. Like I remember
Right.
being a kid, my parents would go to those once in a while, and you dress up and stuff, and everybody gets a role that they have to play, and then they kind of all do all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
it's something you only do once, and then
Or
they do
like
it. Maybe if you do it,
escape rooms. Escape rooms are kind of like that too, where you
yeah,
don't.
in a more of a board game aspect, but yeah,
Yeah.
sort of, yeah. But yeah, so I mean, like those kinds of things, looking into different types of the game that you enjoy, like one-off, uh, RPGs, indie board games, indie RPGs, indie, miniature games, all that kind of stuff. Kind of trying to go out and like look into those types of things because you'll find sometimes that maybe you just love the normal D&D, you love the normal Pathfinder, you love the normal board games, you love Settlers of Catan, whatever, and that's fine. But everybody's a little different, so sometimes you find a game you like those games, but you also like this kind of weird game that like not a lot of people have heard of because they don't have a big marketing budget, they don't have all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
even if they did have a big marketing budget, it might not still be for everybody, but it does particularly scratch your itch, which you may have not even known you had. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's one of the things I love about tabletop gaming is that it's not difficult to go out and try to expand and to look for ways to make your experience better, and level up to some degree and make it so that you're more invested, I guess,
More
monetarily
rounded.
to some degree, but
Yeah.
more rounded as well. That's true. Yeah. But more invested in time and really like, a little bit more focused sometimes too.
Mhm.
Yeah. Cause you can be both well-rounded and focused. I guess does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Like
Okay.
if you've
All right.
got you can be better focused by knowing what other stuff out there that you don't or like and do like.
Right. Kind of like when you're a kid and your parents make you eat all kinds of foods that you wouldn't have probably otherwise. And then you find out that you really like Brussels sprouts or something like that, or
Right.
whatever. Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that was helpful for folks that are interested in kind of trying to move to the next phase within their tabletop gaming, and gave them some ideas. If you've got some ideas of ways to kind of level up as a gamer and to become a more well-rounded or more focused, or maybe both, kind of gamer, let us know in the comments on the YouTube if you're watching us there, or send us an email. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you are listening via your favorite podcast player, or you just aren't into the whole YouTube comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@imgamefor.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And lastly, to find out more about the GameFor platform designed to connect tabletop gamers, please check out our website at www.imgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com. Thanks.
Thanks.